Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Slay It, where we dare to dream big. So hopefully you all saw my last video where I sort of did a rundown of local public transit in Boston with the MBTA. I covered the blue line, the orange line, the green line, and the red line. And if you thought that's all there was to the MBTA, you'd be wrong, because today I'm going to be making a second part to that video where I cover more of what the MBTA has to offer. So I'll be covering the Silver Line, the Commuter Rail, the ferry, MBTA buses, as well as fares on the MBTA. So in case you hadn't saw the first part of my video, this is sort of how I'm going to be covering each of these lines. I'm going to start off by talking about the history of each line, sort of how it came to be, how it changed throughout history to get to where it is today. Then I'll be going into my route breakdown, where I'll be talking about what neighborhoods and suburbs each transit line goes through. So in case you're a tourist or you've recently moved to Boston, you'll know which transit line you'll need to take if you need to get to work or do something important. The third thing I'll be talking about is pros and cons, which is pretty self-explanatory. Basically, what's good about the transit line and what's not good about the transit line. And then the last thing I'll be talking about for each transit line is notable stops. So basically where there might be a transit interchange where you might need to transfer to another transit line, or where there might be a tourist attraction. So in case you're a tourist, you'll know what station you need to get to in order to see said tourist attraction. So yeah, that's sort of how I'll be running through each transit line in this video. Also, one more thing before I begin. If you haven't watched the first part of my video, I highly suggest you watch that first and then come back to watch this second part, as everything that I'm mentioning here is going to make a lot more sense if you've seen the first part of my video. But real quick, if you are still watching, then I want to ask you to please consider subscribing. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers. We're less than 50 subscribers away from this super important milestone. So if you are watching and you are enjoying the content that I've been posting, then please do consider subscribing to give us that final push to the 1K subscriber milestone. So without further ado, here is the second part of my MBTA transit video. So thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy. So we'll be starting off today with talking about the Silver Line. So a little bit of history on the Silver Line. In 1987, the Washington Street Elevated closed down, which left the Roxbury and South End neighborhoods of Boston without access to public transit. And for those of you who don't know what the Washington Street Elevated is, before today's modern day subways, Boston had an elevated train system. So rather than trains running underneath the city, trains were elevated above ground. So that's essentially what the Washington Street Elevated was. It was one of these elevated transit lines that ran along Washington Street. And when it closed down, it left Roxbury and South End without access to public transit. And so in order to allow these neighborhoods to have access to public transit, that is where the Silver Line came in. In 2002, phase one of the Silver Line project began in the form of a bus route along Washington Street, which today is the SL5, which runs between Nubian Station and a loop through downtown. 2 years later, in 2004, phase two of the Silver Line project is a busway connecting South Station to the waterfront. And today, this underground busway is known as Silver Line Way, and it provides an underground tunnel for the SL1, the SL2, the SL3, and the SLW, which I'll be covering in my route breakdown segment right after this history segment. Later in 2004, the SL3 from South Station to City Point began service. And 14 days after the SL3 began service, the SL2 began service from South Station to Dry Dock. Today, Dry Dock is known as the Design Center. In 2005, the SL1 from South Station to Logan Airport began service. However, in 2009, the SL3 from South Station to City Point was discontinued due to low ridership. And later that year, in 2009, phase three of the Silver Line project, which would connect the Silver Line Way to Washington Street, was canceled due to rising costs, with the SL4 from Nubian Station in Roxbury to South Station being proposed as a surface route. It began service that same year. 9 years later, in 2018, a new SL3 route, which replaced the SL3 route from South Station to City Point, was from South Station to Chelsea, and that began service in 2018, bringing us to where we are today with the Silver Line. So that's a bit of a route breakdown for the Silver Line. Now into the neighborhoods that the Silver Line goes through. So the SL4 and the SL5 start at Nubian Station in Roxbury, making their way northeast through the South End neighborhood, starting at Nubian and then making stops at Melnia Cass Boulevard, Lenox Street, Massachusetts Avenue, Worcester Square, Newton Street, Union Park Street, East Berkeley Street, and Herald Street. They then run along the Orange Line for a little bit before going their separate ways, making stops at Tufts Medical Center and Chinatown, both of which are stops on the Orange Line. The SL4 then does a loop of Chinatown via South Station before heading back to Tufts Medical Center and then Nubian the same way it came, making stops at South Station and the Chinatown Gate. The SL5, after stopping at Chinatown, does a loop of downtown via Downtown Crossing Station and Boylston Station before heading back to Tufts Medical Center and then Nubian Station the same way it came, as I said just then, making stops at Downtown Crossing and Boylston Station. The SL1, the SL2, and the SL3, as well as the SLW, all begin at South Station. They then make their way through Seaport, making stops at Courthouse, World Trade Center, and Silver Line Way. However, the SLW ends at the Silver Line Way stop, while the SL2 diverges from the SL1 and the SL3 to keep going through Seaport. The SL2 makes a loop of Eastern Seaport via the Design Center before heading back to South Station the way it came, making stops at Northern Avenue opposite Harbor Street, Tide Street, Dry Dock Avenue at Design Center Place, Black Falcon Avenue, 27 Dry Dock Avenue, and 23 Dry Dock Avenue. Meanwhile, the SL1 and the SL3 go through the Ted Williams Tunnel before they too go their separate ways. The SL1 makes a loop of Logan Airport before going back to Seaport. The SL1 makes stops at Terminal A, Terminal B arrivals, and then a second stop at Terminal B arrivals, and then Terminal C arrivals, as well as Terminal E arrivals before heading back to Seaport. The SL3, after exiting the Ted Williams Tunnel, goes to Chelsea via Airport Station located on the Blue Line. So it makes stops at Airport Station, Eastern Avenue, Fox District, Bellingham Square, and Chelsea. So that's a neighborhood breakdown of the Silver Line. And now into some pros and cons of the Silver Line. So a pro of the Silver Line is that it services neighborhoods that don't have the best access to local transit, such as Roxbury, Seaport, Chelsea, and the South End. And I mentioned this in my history segment. The whole reason that the Silver Line was even made a thing was because Roxbury and South End no longer had access to local public transit. So that was the primary function of the Silver Line, to sort of fill in the gaps, shall we say, of where Boston public transit didn't go through certain parts of Boston. So that's one pro of the Silver Line. And the second pro of the Silver Line is direct airport access. As I mentioned just then, you can get direct airport access to Logan Airport via the SL1. So if you ever want to get to the airport and it might be a little bit difficult for you to get access to a shuttle bus that runs from Airport Station on the Blue Line to the airport, the SL1 is a perfect alternative to that since it makes a loop of the entire Logan Airport. And the final pro of the Silver Line is the Silver Line buses are actually quite large and they can fit quite a lot of people. So if you see on screen right now, that's a picture of a Silver Line bus. And typically a Silver Line bus is like twice the size of your normal MBTA bus, meaning it can fit a lot of people into just one bus. So that's another pro of the Silver Line. And now into some cons of the Silver Line. So one con of the Silver Line is that it doesn't come as often as any local train line. And I mean, this can be expected since it is a bus line and it isn't a train line. So typically Silver Line buses will come, I want to say they say it comes every 3 to 7 minutes, but in all honesty, they usually come every 10 to 15 minutes, I want to say. That is definitely not as often as local train lines come. For a local train line in Boston, trains usually come every 3 to 7 minutes, so quite frequent. Whereas with the Silver Line, it's usually not as frequent, every 10 to 15 minutes. Another con of the Silver Line is it's slower than any other train line, which once again can be expected since it is a bus line that has to deal with traffic plus just not being as fast as a train in Boston. So that's another con of the Silver Line. And the final con of the Silver Line that I'm going to mention here in this video is it's lacking a little in terms of train line connections. So the Silver Line as a whole it's okay in terms of connections, but if you look at each line individually, it's lacking a little bit. For example, let's look at the SL3. So the SL3, it has a connection to the Red Line at South Station, plus a connection to the Blue Line at Airport, and a connection to the Newbury Rockport Line at Chelsea Station. However, it doesn't have any Orange Line connection, nor does it have any Green Line connection. So if you look at each Silver Line individually, it's lacking a little bit in terms of train line connections, meaning you'd have to undergo some sort of transfer in order to get access to a train line that you need to take. So those are some pros and cons of the Silver Line. Now into some notable stops of the Silver Line. So one notable stop of the Silver Line that's along the SL3 is Airport Station, and it provides you with the Blue Line connection, as well as the 104 bus to Malden, which is a frequent bus route, as well as a free airport shuttle bus that can take you to Austin's Logan Airport. So that's one notable stop on the Silver Line. Another notable stop is Downtown Crossing, which is along the SL5, and that can provide you with Red Line connection as well as an Orange Line connection. And another notable stop on the Silver Line is Boylston Station, which is on the SL5, and that provides you with a Green Line connection. And another notable stop is South Station, probably the most notable stop on the Silver Line, because it's where 5 out of 6 of the Silver Lines begin/terminate. The SL1, the SL2, the SL3, the SL4, and the SLW. And it's also a stop on the Red Line, and it's also where many different commuter rail lines begin/terminate, as I'll go into my commuter rail segment later in the video. And it's also a terminus for 2 Amtrak lines, particularly the Acela and the Northeast Regional. Another notable stop, or should I say set of stops on the Silver Line, is the airport loop, the complete loop of Logan Airport, which is pretty self-explanatory. That whole complete airport loop of Logan Airport with the Silver Line is very notable because it allows people to get into Boston. And I'll say the final notable stop on the Silver Line is Nubian Station, which is where 2 out of 6 of the Silver Lines begin/terminate, the SL4 and the SL5. And Nubian Station also has 15 bus connections, which is quite a lot. And that's excluding the SL4 and the SL5. A few of these notable bus connections are the 1 bus to Harvard, the 15 bus to Ruggles or Fields Corner, depending on which direction you're going in, the 23 bus to Ruggles/Ashmont, the 28 bus to Ruggles/Mattapan, and the 66 bus to Harvard via Alston. So those are some notable stops on the Silver Line, as well as the Silver Line as a whole. So now I'll be going into the commuter rail. So for the history segment of the commuter rail, I decided that it would just be way too much to cover the commuter rail history in this video because of just how many lines there are on the commuter rail network. So a video that I would recommend if you want to know more about the history of the commuter rail is Vanishing Underground's commuter rail evolution video. I'll put a link to it in the description as well as in the corner up there, so you can go check that out if you'd like. However, the video was made in 2020, so it is slightly outdated. So for the purpose of keeping you up to date on commuter rail changes in the last 5 years, I'll include some events here that have happened since that video was published. So in 2022, Oak Grove, which is the last stop on the Orange Line, was made a stop on the Haverhill Line. And in 2023, regular service to Foxborough was resumed after the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you've seen Vanishing Underground's evolution video and you've just come back here, in 2020, regular weekday service to Foxborough was shut down during the COVID-19 pandemic, leaving only event service to Foxborough being available. And in 2023, Forest Hills was made a stop on the Providence-Stoughton line. And in 2024, Reedville was also made a stop on the Providence-Stoughton line. And in 2025, which is probably the biggest update since that video was published, is the Middleborough-Lakeville line was completely shut down and replaced by the Fall River-New Bedford line, which I'm going to cover in my route breakdown segment. So stay tuned to find out about what the Fall River New Bedford line even is and how it replaced the Middleborough Lakeville line. So speaking of which, that's a little bit of history on the commuter rail. Now I'll be heading into my route breakdown, and brace yourself because the commuter rail has a lot of different lines, and so I'll be covering each of them very briefly, not as thorough as I usually do my route breakdowns. So I'll be starting off with the Providence-Stoughton line, which goes southwest of Boston, and it starts at South Station, and it goes through Back Bay Station, Ruggles Station, and Forest Hill Station before making stops in Hyde Park, Westwood, and Canton. The line then splits into two branches, with one continuing through Canton before ending in Stoughton, and the other going through Sharon, Mansfield, and Attleboro before entering Rhode Island and going through Pawtucket, Providence, and Warwick before terminating at Wickford Junction Station in North Kingstown, Rhode Island. And now on to the Needham line of the commuter rail. That also starts at South Station and goes southwest of Boston, making stops at Back Bay, Ruggles, and Forest Hills before going through Roslindale and West Roxbury, and then Needham before terminating at Needham Heights. Next up is the Framingham-Worcester line, which also starts at South Station and makes stops in Back Bay, Fenway, Northern Brighton, Newton, Wellesley, Natick, Framingham, Ashland, Southborough, Westborough, and Grafton before ending in Worcester, which is the second most populated city in Massachusetts, for those of you that didn't know. A little fun fact. And then next up, we have the Fairmount line, which is a little bit unusual, if you ask me, because it's the only commuter rail line that never leaves Boston. It's the shortest commuter rail line. And it makes stops in Dorchester and Mattapan before ending in Hyde Park. And then next up, we have the Fall River New Bedford line, which goes south of Boston and makes stops in Dorchester, Quincy, Braintree, Holbrook, Randolph, Brockton, Bridgewater, Middleborough, and Taunton. It's after the East Taunton stop on the Fall River New Bedford line that the line splits into two branches, with one going through Freetown before ending in Fall River, and the other just going through New Bedford. And next is the Franklin-Foxborough line. And this one, if you ask me, is probably the most unusual commuter rail line because it has two ways of leaving Boston, and it either uses the same route as the Fairmount line or it uses the same route as the Needham line / the Providence-Stoughton line by using the Southwest Corridor. So it has two ways of leaving Boston. And these two ways of leaving Boston become one at Reedville Station before the Franklin-Foxborough line continues to go southwest of Boston through Dedham, Westwood, and Norwood. And then it's here that the line splits into two branches, with one going to Foxborough and the other going through Walpole and Norfolk before ending in Franklin. The Greenbush line goes southeast of Boston and makes stops in Dorchester, Quincy, Braintree, Weymouth, Hingham, and Cohasset before ending in Scituate. Next up, we have the Kingston line, which also goes southeast of Boston and makes stops in Dorchester, Quincy, Braintree, Weymouth, Abington, Whitman, Hanson, and Halifax before ending in Kingston. To cap off sort of the transit lines that start at South Station, we have the Foxborough Event Service, which starts not only at South Station, but it also starts at Providence. From South Station to Foxborough, Foxborough Event Service makes stops at Back Bay and Dedham, while from Providence to Foxborough, stops are made at Pawtucket, Attleboro, and Mansfield. The Foxborough Event Service operates on days when there are Patriots games at Gillette Stadium, which is right by Foxborough Station, and departs from Foxborough 30 minutes after the game ends. Next up is the Haverhill line, which goes north of Boston, and unlike the other previous lines I just mentioned, this line actually begins at North Station, and it makes stops in Malden, Melrose, Wakefield, Reading, Wilmington, Andover, and Lawrence before ending in Haverhill, true to its name. And then next up, we have the Lowell line, which goes northwest of Boston and makes stops at Medford, Winchester, Woburn, Wilmington, and Billerica before ending in Lowell. This line also begins at North Station. Next up, we have the Newbury-Rockport line, which, like the previous two I just mentioned, begins at North Station and makes stops in Chelsea, Lynn, Swampscott, Salem, and Beverly. And then the line splits into two branches, with one branch continuing through Beverly before making stops in Hamilton, Wenham, Ipswich, Rowley, and Newburyport, while the other also continues through Beverly, but then goes through Manchester by the Sea and Gloucester before ending in Rockport. Our final commuter rail line that I'm going to be covering here is the Fitchburg line, which goes northwest of Boston and makes stops in Cambridge, Belmont, Waltham, Weston, Lincoln, Concord, Acton, Littleton, Ayer, Shirley, and Leominster before ending in Fitchburg, which is in central Mass, so a little bit north of Worcester. So that's the neighborhood breakdown of the commuter rail, and now I'll be heading into some pros of the commuter rail. So probably the first pro of the commuter rail for me is that it is extremely scenic. So I've only ridden the commuter rail a couple of times before, but every time I've ridden it, I've never been disappointed by just how scenic it is. Like anytime I look out the window, I just see like it's usually when you start to get further and further out of Boston, but once you do, the landscape is absolutely beautiful. You get to see so much like forestry in front of you, or you get to see like a beautiful water body like to the side of you. And it happens a lot of times when you just look out the window when you're riding on the commuter rail. So that's definitely one pro about the commuter rail. It is extremely scenic, depending on like the route it takes. And another pro of the commuter rail is it has lots of stuff, for lack of a better word. It has lots of stuff. And some of this stuff includes bathrooms, outlets, and tables. And bathrooms is something that no other like MBTA transit line possesses. Only the commuter rail and ferries. Yeah, only the commuter rail and ferries have bathrooms. So that's definitely a great amenity of the commuter rail. And another great amenity of the commuter rail that I mentioned briefly then is outlets and tables. So you can get some work done on the commuter rail. Maybe if you're on a time crunch before you're getting to work or something, you can just take out your laptop or take out whatever work you need to do, and you can get it done on the commuter rail on your commute to or from work. And the final pro of the commuter rail, in my opinion, is that it services over 175 cities and towns in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So it is very, very massive and expansive, and it allows people from as far as central Massachusetts to commute into Boston for work. Like, as I just mentioned, the Framingham and Worcester line and the Fitchburg line extend all the way to central Mass in Fitchburg and Worcester. And not only that, the Providence-Stoughton line extends all the way to Rhode Island through Providence. In fact, I know a friend of mine, Julian, if you're watching this, who commutes all the way from Providence into Boston to come to my school. So it is definitely a very massive and expansive network of train lines that allows so many different people from across these 175 cities and towns to commute into work or school or whatever they may need to be doing in Boston. So those are some pros of the commuter rail. Now onto some cons of the commuter rail. So probably the biggest con of the commuter rail that I've heard everybody complain about is it does not come often. Like, a lot of the people that go to my school take the commuter rail to school, and they've all complained about like their train not coming at a convenient time, or like them having to run to like catch your train or like rush for it. And the reason for this is that the commuter rail does not come often at all. Like, it varies from line to line, but usually on weekdays the commuter rail only comes once an hour. Think about that. It only comes once an hour on weekdays, meaning that if you miss your train, you have to stand at your station for an extra hour before the next train comes, which means there's a lot less margin for error if you miss your train. It can be very wasteful of your time in case you have something important to do at home or something like that. And in general, it's just not all that good in case you want to take the commuter rail. And in addition to that, it only comes once every 2 hours on weekends. So in case you need to, like on the weekend, go out into Massachusetts to maybe see some family or take care of some business, you have to time it perfectly to catch the commuter rail so that you're not stuck waiting an extra 2 hours for the next train to come. So that's definitely something extremely inconvenient about the commuter rail. And the second con of the commuter rail, that in my opinion, is negative environmental impact. So the commuter rail is not an electrified train line. It is diesel powered, meaning that the commuter rail in general does have a negative environmental impact. It does emit diesel. It does emit fossil fuels into the atmosphere, which has a negative effect on the environment, and so on and so forth. So yeah, the commuter rail, due to its use of diesel, does have a negative effect on the environment. So that's something to keep in mind if you're environmentally conscious and you do want to use the commuter rail. And so the final con of the commuter rail, in my opinion, is lack of handicap accessible stations. And I feel like this is a result of something else on the commuter rail that I found when riding it, is that a lot of stations feel a little bit like underdeveloped or run down. Like quite a few stops on the commuter rail, unless they have like an Amtrak connection or they have like high ridership, or if they have like another commuter rail connection, is that they're very run down and they feel like kind of just like shacks that you wait under for the commuter rail to come. So I feel like the lack of handicapped accessible stations is just a result of just the general underdevelopment of many of these different commuter rail stations along the commuter rail network. So those are some pros and cons of the commuter rail, and now to some notable stops of the commuter rail. So probably the number one notable stop on the commuter rail is South Station, because it's the terminus for 9 out of 13 of the commuter rail lines. And not only that, it has connections to the Red Line, the SL1, SL2, SL3, SL4, and the SLW, making it an extremely busy station overall. And it also has Amtrak connections to the Acela and the Northeast Regional. And it's probably the second notable stop of the commuter rail that I consider notable is North Station, because it's a terminus for 4 out of 13 of the commuter rail lines. A lot less than South Station, but still quite a large number nonetheless, 4 out of 13 commuter rail lines. And it also provides Green Line and Orange Line connections. So if you want to catch the commuter rail at North Station, you can take the Green Line or the Orange Line to get there. And it also provides an Amtrak connection to the Downeaster line of Amtrak. And probably another notable line on the commuter rail is Back Bay Station, because out of the 9 commuter rail lines that have a terminus at South Station, 4.5 of them go through Back Bay. And the reason I say 4.5 is because of the Franklin-Foxborough line, because as I mentioned in my route breakdown, there's 2 ways you can get out of Boston, either by using the Southwest Corridor, which in that case it goes through Back Bay, or by following the same route of the Fairmount line, which in that case it doesn't go through Back Bay. And it also provides Amtrak connections to the Acela and the Northeast Regional, as well as service on the Orange Line. And another notable stop on the commuter rail is Foxborough Station, because right next to Foxborough Station is Gillette Stadium, which is where the New England Patriots play. So if you want to see a New England Patriots game, as I mentioned in my route breakdown, you'd want to use the Foxborough event service to get to Foxborough Station and therefore to get to Gillette Stadium. And another notable stop is Worcester Station, because it's the second most populated city in Massachusetts, and it also provides connections on Amtrak to the Lakeshore Limited, as well as the Thruway Connecting Service, which is essentially a bus connection that Amtrak offers for certain stations. And in this case, the Thruway Connecting Service allows people at Worcester Station to get to Providence Station. And another notable stop on the commuter rail is Providence, which is the most populated city in Rhode Island and also has Amtrak connections to the Acela and the Northeast Regional, as well as the Thruway Connecting Service to Worcester. And another notable stop is Reedville, because it has 3 commuter rail connections: the Fairmount line, the Providence-Stoughton line, and the Franklin-Foxborough line. And you also have Framingham Station, which provides connections on the Lakeshore Limited, Route 128, which provides connections on the Acela and the Northeast Regional, Anderson-Woburn, which provides connections on the Downeaster, and Haverhill Station, which provides connections on the Downeaster as well.